r/AskReddit. People who watch security cameras for a living, what creepy things have you tried to forget? Not safe for work. Years ago I worked overnight at a homeless shelter for men. A good portion of the regular guys that stayed there had mental health and/or drug problems. There were a lot of fights and the occasional stabbing, but for the most part everyone was relatively behaved, and most were good people at heart. I received a lot of threats, but one ever acted on them. One night when I arrived for my shift I noticed there was a much larger police presence than usual. I walked into our office and the officer in charge started asking me if I had noticed a guy, Richard, behaving unusually at all lately. I had not saw anything out of the ordinary, and I told him such. I looked at the dorm list and noted that he was marked as no longer staying at the shelter. He was a long-term resident, so I thought this was odd. The police left without telling me anything, except the fact they needed security footage from two specific cameras from the night before. I did not work the night before, and the guy I normally work with pulled a no-show. We were the only two people besides the manager, who was on a holiday, that were trained on how to burn footage to a DVD. I spent the rest of my shift in shock. When I found the footage they were looking for I felt physically ill. Richard had gone out onto the second floor smoking deck, finished a cigarette, got up on the railing, and dove headfirst onto the cement below. The first camera on the second floor showed him jump, but the second camera on the first floor was much more gruesome. He landed headfirst and rolled over in a way that he was staring right into the camera as he lay there dying. I quickly put the footage on DVD and went to throw up. I was given the next day off. No counseling. No nothing. I will never forget that one. He was a pretty good dude as far as I knew him. Some mental issues, but no one knew he was suicidal or why he did it. So many of these will give me nightmares, so I'll throw one in the mix that I never want to forget. A year back I was working at a hostel and we have security cameras throughout the building. Watching the footage from the camera in the kitchen. It is about 2 AM and a very drunk guest walks in, grabs some snacks and accidentally drops an empty bottle on the ground. He then proceeds to kick it up into the air, then kick it again in air, where it flies across the entire length of the room perfectly into the recycling bin. In his drunken state he threw up his hands, ran around in a circle clearly in shock at how amazing he is. Then after looking around he noticed there was no one there to see it. After that he looked visibly depressed and stumbled back out of the kitchen. Working in a rehearsal studio for bands we had camera at the front desk that pointed down the hall with the entrances to all the rooms. One day I'm sitting there minding my own business and noticed there was a girl sitting in the hallway outside one of the studios. She had come in with the band that was practicing, and I just assumed she didn't feel like sitting in the loud space with the band. So I got up and went to tell her she was welcome to sit in the lobby where there was a couch and TV. I got around the corner and she wasn't there. I went back the desk and there she was, sitting in the hall waiting outside the room. So I went back out to find her not there again. I assumed she had gone into the room, so I went and knocked and they informed me that the girl had left a while before, just after they had gotten started practicing. So I went back and there she was, still on the camera. It was only then that I realized I had accidentally bumped the freeze frame button for the monitor. I used to do asset protection for a WAMAD in a very heroin addicted area. The creepiest thing was seeing how fast someone would go from completely normal to absolutely out of it in the span of a year because of the drug. You could build a timeline of their demise through CCTV pictures and video. One man in particular really stood out to me. The first time I apprehended him, he was very polite and intelligent, just stealing to get his fix. A year later, and the fourth time I caught him, he was basically a shell of a man. He tried running from me, and I looked him right in the eyes and said, "I know you. Gary last name. Please don't run." The look on his face of someone knowing him who he couldn't even remember will always stay with me. Not necessarily creepy, but I work on security for a popular UK supermarket and came into work one day to find a note asking me to burn an incident off the cameras onto disk. It was something from the car park the previous night, so I figured we'd had a shoplifter in or an accident in the car park, but no, it wasn't anything as pleasant as that. We'd had a situation where a couple, older white gentleman and youngish Asian female, had been in store and the night security guy just thought they were acting a bit funny, so he follows them round store on CCTV in store to see if anything went on. Nothing really happened during this time, though the guy seems to become more and more aggravated. They go outside having purchased their shopping to pack it into the car boot, when a clear argument occurs between them. He suddenly turns around, kicks the empty trolley across the car park, and then smacks her full force in the face out to seemingly nowhere. She recoils in pain. A bit more shouting takes place, but she seems to dutifully take her seat in the passenger seat despite what just took place. During the process of burning this to disk for the police, since our security guy had called it in as an assault, I had to rewatch the moment where he hits her over and over again, but watch helplessly as she seems to calmly get into the car of the man who just assaulted her. Long story short, she was a mail order bride who was trafficked here, and as well as assault he got done for people trafficking, so a pretty wholesome ending to an otherwise awful story. I'm not in security, but I work for a bank and part of my job is checking the cameras in the morning for pings overnight, and then making sure all the pings were just squirrels, leaves, etc. Last week I saw a ping on our back entrance camera, and when I went to watch the video, it was a guy I didn't recognize walking back and forth in front of the door at 3 AM for a solid 20 minutes. Like just pacing the whole time, and every couple minutes he'd stop and walk up to the door and stare into the camera. Then he'd go back to pacing. A car eventually went by, and that must have set something in him off, because he legit ran away and didn't come back. We ended up calling the cops about it, but I still have no idea who he was or what his deal was. Was watching CCTV footage of a parking deck, and on the 9th level there's this guy sitting in the middle of the deck, banging his head on one of the pillars. All of a sudden the guy just stops and runs to the edge. Without stopping or jumping, he flings himself over the edge. I immediately called dispatch and told them what had happened. Few days later I was offered counseling for those events. Worked as a harbor master a while ago. Had to check the marina's cameras after a boat was abandoned at our docks. I was looking for the owner. I looked on the tape from the boat's first night in the marina. The man who had sailed the boat in was standing on the end of his boat for 2 hours, barely moving. Then at 1:30 AM he just walked off the back and dropped into the water. He never came back up. Never found his body. Freaky. S. I work in a retail store, and for a while I worked security here. Watching the security cameras wasn't technically my job, but we were consistently short-handed in that department and the manager was grooming me for promotion, so I got to fill in and watch the cameras occasionally. One day when we were reviewing footage from overnights, we saw this teenager calmly set down his shopping basket, take off his hat and glasses, and just charge at a wall. Hit it head on. He did this 2 more times. When he was done, his face was a bloody mess, and he put his hat and glasses back on and just left. Weirded me right the hell out. I used to do it support for a company that had a lot of heavy machinery moving around inside a big warehouse type area. This giant front end loader would scoop up material and dump it into a hopper. Along the sides of the floor were these huge concrete barriers. I've heard them called Jersey barriers and Mayfair blocks, but they are about 10 feet tall. And this one guy's life was ended when the front end loader inadvertently scooped the base of the barrier and landed on one of 2 guys walking shoulder to shoulder through the plant. I was tasked to review the footage, then make copies, 6 of them, to be exact, and then ensure that the footage worked and was self-executable and able to be run from a USB stick. So I had to watch the footage of this guy get killed over a dozen times. I too was offered counseling for just watching the video. Not for a living, but I have had security cameras for the last 10 years at my house. A guy was shot 7 times in front of my house, but I only caught the audio. I've had random people walk around the front of the house looking for anything to steal, and actually stealing shit several times. Countless instances where people come up to break into my car until they realize the motion light kicks on, and we have cameras. Most of the time people breaking into cars have a large tool bag over their shoulder. It's so amazing about the number of times people come up to my house doing weird shit. If I didn't have the cameras I wouldn't know about hardly any of this shit. One pro tip for anyone installing cameras: make sure you put lots of signs saying that there is video surveillance, otherwise you just end up with a lot of footage of people stealing stuff. A guy was shot 7 times in front of my house, but I only caught the audio. Geez, you'd think he'd stop walking by your house after, like, the 3rd time. Not security cameras per se, but I had a SOC type job monitoring corporate internet usage. We had an image inspector watching people's web traffic, and it would throw up questionable images that someone on the network downloaded onto the big SOC screen. Being a medical related company, there were a lot of breast cancer type traffic that would throw off the porn detectors, which is why we watched in real time. One time I was sitting at the desk overnight, nobody should have been working, and suddenly the SOC screen turned into a wall of graphic child porn. Some genius took his laptop home, went into work, and started browsing so as to avoid being caught by his ISP. He's in prison now. This incident is a large part of why I no longer do that kind of work, or corporate forensics. They make it sound like it's all catching hackers and espionage, but in reality, it's mostly looking at other people's porn.